All right, guys. So for your first reading assignment, I had you read a little bit of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. When you think of Walt Whitman is the poet. He is the American poet. And I had you read just a bit because Song of Myself is a very long poem, but it is one of the most famous poems in American literature. It was published in Leaves of Grass. So as I had you read a little bit about Walt Whitman at the beginning, Whitman has a variety of experiences as a poet. And he worked in a lot of different capacities. He was an editor, he was a writer, he even worked as a nurse during the Civil War. And he said he found great fulfillment in his role as a nurse, but eventually the blood and the toil and the pain of watching all of these young men die did take its toll on him. Post Civil War, he did support the Mexican War. He was a part of the idea of this manifest destiny where we had a movement towards peopling the West and taking over the West as part of the American identity. But he did become a free soiler, so he actually was anti-slavery and didn't like the acquisition of indigenous land. So he was a really fascinating figure. And just to go over a little bit and to give you an idea of kind of how we do these lectures, sometimes I will give you a lecture in the form of a video. Sometimes it will be a PowerPoint, a Prezi, whatever it is. And what I want you to do is be taking notes. Take notes in your books. Take notes on your own as we go through these different ideas and see how they're all connected. Because at the fourth or fifth week of each unit, I'm going to introduce your essay assignment. So I want you guys to be kind of piecing together how these different pieces of literature fit together over the course of this historical epic or era that we're trying to build. So right now we're working on 1865 to 1914, which is a huge era. So I'm going to be walking you guys through a lot of different authors over the next few weeks. And we're starting with Whitman because he really brings us from pre-Civil War to post-Civil War. So Song of Myself was published in 1855, so it's pre-Civil War. It was republished a few times after that. And it really celebrates this idea of American individualism and American ingenuity and sort of the glory of the individual within the American identity. So if you look at section 1, I just want you to kind of look at a few sections here. I had you read sections 1 through 5. There's a lot of celebratory, boastful language that's used here. And you see, he says, I celebrate myself and sing myself. So everything is very egocentric, and he's not apologetic for it. So this is part of that burgeoning American identity of power and of individualism and of the right of every person to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make whatever they can out of their life. And this really speaks to the rights of the individual. As in 1855, we have a lot of racial tension, and we have a lot of issues coming to head with the future of the Emancipation Proclamation and slavery coming to an end very, very soon. So we have this amazing identity starting to form that really focuses on the individual. And I want you to notice that he's using a lot of sensual and sensory imagery. So when you look at his syntax, his phrases that he uses, there's a lot in there that is designed to bring about a sensory experience. So he uses words in section 2, for example, the smoke of my own breath, echoes, ripples, buzzed, whispers, love roots, silk thread. So we have these images of sound, these images of feel, these images of touch, smell. We have all of these sort of, it's at once almost grotesque because he's really celebrating every part of the human being, the mind, the body, the soul, everything. And so Whitman is known for using a lot of this sensual imagery. He's unabashedly sensual, and he celebrates these what in polite society would be considered vices to talk about, or things that you should not talk about in polite culture that's politically correct. And he's really taking a stance and saying, no, look at all that has been given to me in my own corporal existence. So I really want you guys to make sure that you're really understanding why he's doing this. He's really promoting the idea of the individual and all the glory that's been built into your physical existence and being. So if you move on to section 3, for example, he's really celebrating the moment. It's a very carpe diem type experience. He's saying, look at all that has been given to you. He says, there was never any more inception than there is now. He uses this word now repeatedly. He says, there's never more youth or age than there is now. So there is no moment but now. And it kind of builds with this excitement of what's happening in America. And he's really saying, this is the time to be alive. It's kind of that interesting dichotomy that we always have, where we always feel like we're in the best time to be alive that there could be. So he makes this incredible connection. If you move down to where he says, clear and sweet is my soul, and clear and sweet is all that is not my soul. So this individualism is not isolationism. I need you to really make sure you understand that. He's not separating the body from the rest of the world. What he's doing is saying the body is connected to the world, and the world is connected to the body. We're all in this sort of harmonious sense of being. It's a little bit hippie-ish, if you will. But what he's saying is we exist within the world, and the world exists within us, and it's this symbiotic supportive relationship. So this poem, there's so much it's positive, but it's also very stark. So it's very blunt and very straightforward. For he says above that, he talks about, out of the dimness, opposite equals advance. And he says, always substance and increase, always sex, always a knit of identity, always distinction, always a breed of life. So life is always teeming. And he's saying we should not be ashamed of these things. We should not be ashamed of physical desire. We should not be ashamed of what the body wants and is and does, but we should be celebrating all of the things, whether it's the grotesque or not, or whether it's something that is pleasurable. So if you flip the page to the top of 26, he says that welcome is every organ and attribute of me. So everything that's in me is beautiful. Everything that's in me is created to support my existence. And I exist to support, therefore, the rest of the world, is what he's saying. So he says, I am satisfied. I see, dance, laugh, sing. So he's really promoting this idea of joy. So if you look at the syntax and the tone of the poem, you're looking at this joyful tone that is exubatory and exclamatory and celebration of life and everything that's teeming within it. If you move down to 4, this is where he sort of steps out and looks at society. So we have the individual and we have the world. Now he's looking at sort of society, so the conglomeration of individuals together. And what he says is basically that you have all these you have these dates and discoveries and authors and all these inventions and societies and all these different wonderful things. And he says, within that we have ills. We have sickness, we have money, we have depressions, and we have all these different things. And he brings up fratricidal war, which is a really interesting note to make pre-Civil War, because at the time, society everyone knows we're heading towards war. So he brings this up pre-Civil War, which is really interesting, especially not knowing what the outcome is going to be. Doubtful news, fitful events. So we have all these rumors of things happening. And he says, they come and go in the days and nights for me again, but they are not the me, myself. So he's saying, what happens in the world, the events of the world, are not on my body. So he says, I can still find joy and peace and happiness and all these amazing, he can be satisfied in his body and in his being without having to be wrapped up in the issues of the world, but he can still be a man of the world, and he can still appreciate and care about the concerns of the world, but they are not of him. So he makes that distinction very, very clear, which is really interesting. So it's part of that individualism. It's not isolationism, but individualism. And the last thing in section 5, he says, I believe in you, my soul. So he says, I don't necessarily have to worry about all these other things, but there's one thing I do believe in. It's me, it's myself, it's my soul. And so he brings about this connection here at the very end of 5 on page 27, where he talks about, I know the hand of God is the promise of my own. I know the Spirit of God is the brother of my own. And he says, a little bit down, he says that a kelson of the creation is love. So again, we come back to this sort of pseudo-hippie idea, really, where he's bringing it back to God and love, and he's saying, at the end of the day, creation is love. So creation is based in goodness. Creation is based not in evil and punishment, but in this idea that you are love, you are made of love, you exude love, and that the world itself is made of love. And I don't want you to think of this as like laugh it off as like a pseudo hippie idea. He's really getting to the idea of positive connections in the world and positive sense of being. So that's just an introduction about how Whitman kind of sets us up here for the beginnings of 1865 to 1914. So I have a little assignment for you to do after this, and then after that, your week is pretty much done. So please continue on the next assignment, and let me know if you have any questions.